So I like spicy content. I like content that gets my attention because that's the content I like to create. And so for this next speaker, they were one of 30 plus people to actually submit a speaker submission form. And honestly, a lot of them, they were great, but I was like, I'm sorry, I already kind of know what I want. But I read this one, I'm like, this got my attention. And then I went on LinkedIn, I saw this whole hashtag Spicy Monday that everyone keeps doing. And I'm like, where was the inception of this? And then I saw Dean's video talking shit on conferences. No, I'm just kidding. So let's please welcome Dean to the stage on Spicy Onboardings. Come on.
How's it going? Before I get started, I don't know how many of you go to conferences, so you may not get the reference. I want to give you the obligatory Slagle warning. There will be some light swearing in this presentation. I am also not a sales and marketing person. I am an ops person, so I will be saying things that are hurtful about sales and marketing. So I'm sorry, clutch your pearls if you have them. So my name is Dean. Many of you may actually know me as Dr. Zoidberg on Reddit or Slack. Someone was on Reddit trashing this conference. Whoever you are, I'll break your legs. I have spent over a decade in the MSP industry as a service manager and operations manager. I can probably fix your printer. Although to some of the questions about being technical and selling, I am a non-technical service manager. And I frequently annoy a lot of the vendors that are in this space and the fine folks that helped, pay my mortgage, so be nice to them. But more importantly, we grew our MSP from about 700K ARR when I started to well over $54 million and counting over a 10-year period of time. And sales and marketing were a big component of that, but so is ops. And what I want to talk about a little bit today is onboardings and how if you approach, and you can do this with any service delivery, but if you approach your onboardings from an operational mindset, you're going to find that you end up having a package that's surprisingly easy to sell. We're not going to get through all the content here. This isn't something I normally present. If you want a smooth, dialed-in expert presentation, you should have been here for Jennifer Bleem, or you should be here later for Don Sizer. But you're getting a presentation I don't normally get, so there's a lot of words in the slide deck that's more for all of you if you don't want to listen to me or you want to download this later. The main areas that I want to talk about, and we won't get to all of them, I want to talk about onboarding framework and concepts. We're going to start there because that's enough to get you all started. We're going to talk a little bit about pre-sales, remediation, and what isn't onboarding to connect it to the sales cycle everyone here has been talking about. And we won't really have time to get into it today, but I do want to point out two other important areas. Being able to visually roadmap any deliverable you have for your client is incredibly helpful. And to some of the questions about how does a salesperson who doesn't understand something sell it, people understand pictures. And then lastly, a lot of this should program you to realize that you do not need the exiting MSP provider's cooperation or runbook. So this might define some of you, or this might speak to some of you. So let's talk about the problem statement. You're likely at your MSP, owner-led sales, or maybe you have a sales employee. I'm assuming most of you don't have a massive team of salespeople. You have a pre-sales process because you're here, right? Like you guys are doing something pre-sales. And you arrive at a number, you get ink on paper, and then once that's done, you enter into onboarding. This nebulously undefined quasi-project, quasi-support period where you kind of do a bunch of stuff, some of which the client can see and understand, some of which only you care about, and you hope the entire time you're going to have engagement and cooperation. And along that way, you rely probably pretty heavily on the exiting provider to give you documentation, logins, credentials. Maybe that jerk of an MSP, they had the client's Microsoft tenant set up in a way where now you can't take it over. That's never happened to anybody. You don't really have a well-defined stop and start date. It's sort of when your team can send someone on site, and eventually your team sort of says we're done onboarding, but somewhere along the way you've also started supporting the client, and we'll know when it's done. And you don't really have an explicit definition of when support starts. It kind of starts right away, right? Like, I mean, the client needs someone to help them during the onboarding. And somewhere 2 weeks, 2 months, you're supporting the client. I think that describes a lot of MSPs. And if that does describe you, a thing I can almost guarantee is your agreements don't start off profitable. And in fact, some of you have done some mental math to say, that's okay, I don't expect my agreement to be profitable until a year into the agreement, which is stupid and you're dumb for saying that, but it's okay, and I understand why you'd say that, because I used to say that. So this is most people. And I have this amazing graph that I had my graphic artist make in, I understand, if you guys want to hire them, let me know. If you look at a bell curve of MSPs, well, everything I described is probably most of you in the middle of the bell curve. And I think that's important to understand because you are performing onboardings, and that's good. And you're not doing a bad job, but you're not doing a great job. And the thing is, your competitors are also not doing a bad job. And that's important here, because once you accept the fact that every other MSP around you is doing an acceptable job rendering support, which I'm sorry, they are. You may not agree with their standards or the way they implement a tool, but there's nobody in this room that treats their customers poorly. And you realize that you're not really using the most critical part of your relationship to be any sort of a value add whatsoever. So the goal is to change that. So we're going to start first with sort of some intro concepts, because if I run out of time, this is good enough. So we want to start with defining our onboarding period. It's going to feel a lot like a project. And if you're not used to project management, and since you're MSPs, I know that probably no one in this room is good at project management except my shirt father Keith, who asked that spicy question a little while ago. You guys probably aren't reading using a Gantt chart or a project plan properly anyways. It's okay. It's fine. I'm not judging you. We're going to pretend it's a project. Give yourself 4 weeks. You're going to add that to your sales presentation. You're going to have an onboarding schedule. You are going to bake in both the concept of scarcity and also keep your service managers from killing themselves. Because you're going to turn around and say, I can only onboard a finite amount of people at one time. And if you do get to the point where your top of funnel is so amazing that this breaks for you, well, then you'll hire people to do more onboardings. And that's a great problem to have. You're going to hold yourself accountable to that date. Not hold the client accountable. You're going to hold yourselves accountable to that date. The client doesn't give a shit about what you need to do to onboard them. That's your problem. And then you're going to define the start of support. That's probably the most important point that most of you are going to have a problem with during this presentation. And as a spoiler alert, that support is not the onboarding process. And the fact that the client, I'll get more into this in another slide, but the fact that the client does not have someone to support them during the onboarding is not your fault. And it's not your risk to mitigate, and you don't want to on purpose. And you want to acknowledge that slop. And we're going to get into that in a second, what I mean by that. But we want to acknowledge the fact that during the onboarding, that is not the best version of your MSP. It's also not the best version of the leaving provider. You want to tell the client that. So in that model that we described previously as sort of unoptimized onboarding that most MSPs are doing, what works well in that model? Well, it's really easy, right? Like if I don't have any barriers, then there's nothing to overcome, so it's easy. And that's kind of it. Like there's nothing for the client to say no to. But what's wrong with it? Like you don't set any expectations or they're set poorly. And everyone in this room knows that once somebody becomes an MSP client, expectations are what matters. That's what they get upset about. That's what they get butthurt about. It's not about the stack we're using, the AV, the quality of our support. It's when we don't read their minds and do what they think that we thought they knew they were going to do. It doesn't establish any value whatsoever. There's no value to that onboarding whatsoever. It is useless as any form of a sales tool or a value add. You have no control over a profitable support date. And spoiler alert, if you have an agreement term that's like longer than a year, your agreements should be profitable like in the first 3 months. Like when I say profitable, I mean like an efficiency rating of like 1.2 to 1.3. That's acceptable and normal. And if that's not the case and it's taking you a year to get profitable, you're not doing a good job selling services. And the onboarding is a large reason why. You can't charge for it. And a lot of you don't charge for onboardings. And stick with me on this because charging for it does not mean you need to invoice for it. but you can't charge for it. And it isn't a wow experience. We're going to talk about wow experiences for a minute, because this is really fundamental, and it's a fundamental concept, I think, in selling and presentation that everyone in here can get behind. This is stolen from a slide I used at MSP Geek earlier this year on a different talk, but it fits. So as you can see, it's a ScaleCon slide. It's not an MSP Geek slide. So it's an interesting thing. And this comes from a talk about not saying yes to everything. When you do something good, that will have a small uptick in your relationship for your client. When you do something bad, that has a massive downtick. That ends up meaning is that failing costs you more than succeeding. Well, of course it does, Dean. No, my point is not that you need to do a bunch of good stuff. You need to avoid the dips. Your guys' job is to do the good stuff, right? If I hire you to cut my lawn, your job is to cut the grass. I'm not gonna pat you on the back, be like, wow, you cut 10,000 blades of grass, you're amazing. That's your job. So that's a small uptick. But if you miss a spot, or if you use a chemical that gets my dog sick, that's a downtick, and I don't like you. Your onboardings, you are going to not be displaying the best version of yourself during the onboarding. So it's important that you capture this idea that I have a first opportunity to give the client a wow experience, and I can start really high up, because I am absolutely going to do something that's going to cause a downtick at some point. The higher up I start, the better our relationship is. So what are we going to do about it? Well, you need to bookend your onboardings with a defined start and stop date. Oh, my graphic covered it up. If you can tell, I haven't read my slide deck since I wrote it for here. If you've never managed projects like this before, give yourself about a month to do that onboarding. You want to put that into your sales presentation, because this is going to help your sales team if they can explain this entire element of your first actual engagement. What's the first thing that happens after ink on paper? It's onboarding, right? It's not support, it's onboarding. And you want your sales team to be able to talk about it, to brag about it. But it needs to be defined. You need to explain when critical and official support starts. A lot of you will do something where you say we'll make the best effort, ad hoc, no SLA, emergency only, during the onboarding. I understand that the needs of running a business may require some of you to say that, but it's not really a great tactic, because really what you're basically saying is, hi, my MSP is going to be shitty for a while, but then I promise we won't be. And that's not a great way to start off a relationship. I mean, think about that like with a person. Like imagine you're at a bar and you meet a new person for the first time. They're like, hi, I know I'm a jackass right now, but I promise I'm great when I'm sober. Like, you know? And it's kind of the same vibe here. So until the client is fully documented and fully supportable, and fully supportable means that you are able, whatever your SLAs, SOPs, and whatever you've said in your MSA you're delivering, until you're able to render that at a baseline level, maybe not optimized, they're not supportable. So don't lie to them and tell them that they are. Own that. You'll be the only provider that's told them that, by the way, which will set you apart if they're comparing you against other people. And we can talk about that a little bit in a minute as well. And I already said that, okay. So at the end of the onboarding period is when your support starts. And that should be when your support agreements start. And if you're saying, well, if I don't get paid for my support agreement until after my, 2-week, 4-week onboarding process, well, how do I make any money during that time period? Yeah, that's probably why we should be charging for our onboardings like a project. Now, some of you are in the room and you're thinking, all right, well, I hear you. I'm going to use that period of time to sell a project to fix some things. And whoever you enterprising people are, I appreciate your dramatic foreshadowing, but don't do that. So make it clear that during the onboarding, this is going to be a rough patch. And I think it's important that you are the one, not the exiting provider, that you frame the fact that it's going to be a rough patch for everybody. When you're able to explain to the client that, listen, as we bring on our services, we are going to disable their services over our plan. That means their ability to support you is going to diminish. you are going to see a decline in support quality from the old MSP. You're also going to notice, as we slowly bring our services on, you will see an increase in our quality as we do that. But until they're gone and we're in, this isn't going to be a pleasant experience, and if we told you otherwise, we're full of crap. You need to own that, because you're setting an expectation, and I know everybody in this room is a customer service first organization. All of you are. I know that all of you will still go above and beyond to treat your client during the onboarding like they're the most important client, but you've set the bar down here. So now this client's like, well, the MSP said this is gonna suck. If this is what sucking looks like, this is amazing. So you establish this onboarding schedule, and this is an important sales tool. You're gonna go in and you're gonna figure out, well, how many onboardings could I do in a defined period of time? And for the aggregate MSP in here, that's probably somewhere, let's say, between $500,000 to like $3.5 million in revenue. With the type of staff you have in that MSP, it's probably not more than 2 onboardings a month. And I'll be honest, if you have 2 prospects a month closing, that's fucking awesome. And hell yeah, and you should be on stage here on a panel talking about that, because that's hard. That is hard, okay? And if you're doing that, that's great. If you're doing more than that, it's even better. But let's set the bar reasonably and say that we're a maximum availability of doing 2 onboardings a month. Well, here's the thing. Now that you give that to your salesperson, we have a scarcity metric for closing. We can now say to the prospect, I have an onboarding slot available on the 1st or the 15th. If I don't get you signed up by this point, unfortunately, we're going to miss that slot on the 1st. Oh, well, I really needed you to start at the beginning of the month. I totally get that. I know your old provider's leaving you. That's why it's really urgent that we get through this process and get you signed now. We're going to miss that date, and the first we can onboard you will be the 15th. It allows you to put an element of scarcity around this concept of your onboarding. It's immediately establishing value to the fact that your onboardings have a process. Your MSP has a plan. Your MSP actually understands what they're doing, right? I mean, how many of you have met a competitor, like we talked about before, you've been like, these guys don't have a plan at all. Well, great, you just differentiated yourself right off the gate without having to talk about stack or anything else. Your onboardings are going to be both the best and the worst version of your MSP at the exact same time. You need to own this. You need to own this, you need to love this, you need to cherish this, you need to make it a part of your identity. You're going to create the illusion of competency and control, which you have neither of during this period. You don't know anything about the client, and you have no control over their environment. You're going to act like you do, but you're also going to acknowledge the fact that this is a hot mess express, but it's okay because they've got you. I have an example here. I give notes to myself, sorry. So imagine I'm a food critic, right? And every one of your clients is a food critic. And I decide that I want to eat at a restaurant that isn't currently open. I show up at the door, and of course that restaurant's not going to turn me away. I'm famous food critic and well-known jerk Dean, so we'll let them in, but they're not ready for me. So now I have to watch them scramble. I watch them prepare a table. I watch them set the table. I watch the kitchen rush in to start trying to do the prep they weren't going to do for another 45 minutes. It's a mess, and it's not meant for me to see, but yet I get to see it. Now, if they handle that properly, think like Gordon Ramsay, if they handle that properly, that's impressive. Yes, it's a mess, but it's so impressively orchestrated that I'm like, holy crap, like these people were not expecting me, and like, whoosh, set, I'm not supposed to see that. But it's done at such a high level of competency that I am impressed by that slot. That's y'all, and that's what you're going to do in these onboardings. You're going to acknowledge the fact that you are not supposed to see this mess, but you are going to see this mess. It will not be this mess once you sit down to eat, but until then, this is a mess. We're sorry, we're cleaning, we're sweeping, but look at how good we are at all those things, by the way. Look at the process we have for how we bust a table, for how the prep cook gets things ready. Look at how organized our team is. Look at that person that's running out to wipe that extra crumb off your table they forgot about, how nicely pressed their uniform is. Everything about it screams professionalism and competency, even though the act you are witnessing is inherently incompetent and chaotic. That's your onboardings. So, we got through the first introductory part. Let's see if we can squeeze in a little more. I got 11 minutes left. So, We want to stop having owner sales do technical discovery. And if Alex Farley's in the room, he can explain to you why. And if he's not, go talk to Alex Farley, and he will explain to you why. We want to take photos during technical discovery. This is super important. If you want to get into the nitty-gritty of how to do a high-level optimized onboarding in a $50 million MSP, you take photos of everything, and you don't get shy about taking photos. You're there to support the client, and you very politely ask, but it's not really asking, do you mind if I take photos of everything? As you start taking photos of everything. Because you can onboard a lot later from photos. You need to look for technical debt. You need to use a discovery report to build a minimum standards plan. And a lot of you do discovery reporting, like the rapid fire tools type of thing. I know a lot of you are doing that. And then you want to use that minimum standards plan as a sales tool, hopefully before you start the onboarding. And you're going to charge for it. So you probably do a pre-sales assessment already, right? Like rapid fire tools, or maybe you run Nessus. You do something to somehow arrive at like, this is client, this is how screwed you are. And it's probably pretty technical. Maybe you do it while you're on site as the owner. Maybe you bring somebody with you. And then we usually use that to build some sort of like fear and pain style project that we use to sell our services, right? And we don't want to solve too much of the pain before they sign up, because then they won't buy and all the other horse shit all the salespeople are telling you. They're not wrong, but the point is, don't do that. You want that plan because you want to define that all of that stuff you discovered, some of that needs to be fixed before you will even onboard this client. All that info that you're collecting, all those roadblocks you're running into, you're going to compare that against your minimum standards, because everybody here has hopefully some sort of minimum standards of some type, even if it is just in your head. Everyone has an idea of their minimum standards. We do know how low we are willing to go. I know everybody loves delicious revenue, but everyone here has turned some client away at some point that was just like a no. So you have minimum standards even if they're not on paper. You want to propose a report that will, basically it's a project proposal, that will bring the client to meet those minimum standards. What I suggest you do, if you're not currently doing this, you want to physically go to the prospect. This is important. If you're trying to do onboardings, and especially discovery remotely, I'm not saying it can't be done, I'm just saying you're already not good at sales, which is why you're here, so just please go there and just accept that it's not your strength. You want to go there and you want to assess the level of technical debt. How many problems have they put off fixing? And I think everybody understands that conceptually, but we get way caught up in the wrong information when we do this. You really want to look at the current state of the physical environment. It really doesn't matter how terrible their SharePoint or Active Directory is, or how out of date the patches on the server are, because you'll find that out from your tool set and you can fix that remotely. That's not really that much of a cost center to address. And of course it's not great because it wasn't you doing it. That's not what we care about during onboarding, and spoiler alert, your clients don't give a shit about that. So if you're telling your clients that their AD schema is terrible, they don't care. That's my gardener from earlier saying, hey boss, we had to cut 5,000 extra blades of grass over there today. I don't give a shit. They go, okay, is that important? Is that bad? I don't know. They don't care about that. And there's a reason that you want to take pictures of their physical equipment and environment and focus on that. Because that's going to tell you a lot more about how your client values technology, how technology impacts revenue flow at their business, and basically how invested they're going to be in this relationship. Way more than what line of business software they have and how out of date it is. If you tell somebody your QuickBooks is out of date and they need to upgrade to the latest version, you won't support it, they're probably going to go, okay. They don't want to spend the money, but they're going to say okay. If you tell somebody that the box is unsupportable, the box that's been in the room for years, they don't want to change the box. They like the box. They can see the box. They're comfortable with the box. They put that dust there. They worked hard for that box to get dusty. So you want to look at that. You want to see that visible technical debt. And you want to, as I said, be respectfully pushy about this. If a client says, I'd rather you not walk around and take pictures, well, I'm sorry, I'll try to be nice and not, take pictures of PII as you walk on and take pictures. And if they're going to kick you out, they're going to kick you out. That wasn't the client to begin with. So if you're nervous about this, don't be. I know saying have confidence has never worked in the history of anybody who didn't have confidence, but have confidence. and go around and take those pictures. And you want to make sure, this is an important thing, if you are the owner and you are currently doing owner-led sales, it's important as soon as you are able to, you are not the one doing the technical discovery, simply because of the fact that you do not want to be perceived as the one that crawls under the desks. Because that then becomes the client that asks for your cell phone number, and that is the client that texts you about issues instead of using your ticketing system that makes you hate your life. And it will remove your ability to set yourself up as having a value-added relationship for things that Don Sizer will talk to you about later today. So I understand some of you, you are all there is, and you have to be the one doing that, and I own that while you have to. The minute it doesn't have to be you, make sure it's not you. So anybody can run rapid-fire tools. It's pretty easy. Anybody can check the serial number on a firewall. Do better than that. Like, all your competitors are already doing that kind of onboarding discovery. Take this seriously. As I said, the state of their digital life isn't really important right now because we'll fix that later remotely. We don't need that to be adjusted for initial support to start because that's not really what support is. So you want to look at the entire environment and you want to look for lowest common denominator minimum standards. What's the lowest level thing that if it failed would cause you to have to roll a truck to fix it? That is the most expensive thing you can possibly do as a service provider, and you don't want to do it because it's slow, it dedicates a person to it, it never works as well as it would remotely, and that guy who goes on site, no matter how good they are, is never going to represent your brand as perfectly as they would in the office. So that's what you want to look for. You want to look for stuff that you have to go back to fix. So things like a non-supportable edge appliance. I don't mean is it your brand. Fix that later if it's not your brand. I mean, like, is it a firewall you can log into from your office that has a GUI landing page or a CLI, whatever your techs need? Yes or no? If not, then you can't support it. You'd have to drive there, and we don't want to do that. Same thing with like switches. Like, might not be your brand, might not be the stack that's going to be there forever. Can you remotely manage them? I mean, at least with SNMP, the probe on your, RMM tool, can someone from the office go in and download the configuration and read it and make some changes? Because they can, do the onboarding from the office for those pieces. If not, that's a minimum standard. Wires that aren't labeled. I don't know what they do, so if they're not labeled, then the client doesn't know what they do, which means no one knows what they do. So am I going to call a client and have them unplug wires and troubleshoot stuff during the onboarding? That needs to be fixed. No power protection on core infrastructure. That's a basic one, right? But if there's no UPS on a critical line of business, piece of technology and the power fails, which it absolutely will fail, despite what any owner tells you when you ask them how often does the internet and the power go off. Oh, not often. They're full of shit. It goes out all the time. So that's a roll of truck. We don't want that. That's a minimum standard. Any critical business process that relies on the single point of failure device, the server on a laptop that's always been running since the before times and we don't touch it. Anything like that you would just be objectively screwed and have to go there and dump hours into it, that's the stuff you're looking for right now. And you want to use good observational skills. You don't need a high-level technical person to do this. A moderate-low technical skill, common business sense is more important. The ability to understand how people think is more important than sending a high-level tech on site. You do not need a level 3 to go on site and recognize that D-Link from Best Buy doesn't have a management interface, right? So now we're not sending our most expensive people on site to tool around in a bunch of equipment and servers that we don't even care about right now. Take pictures of everything and learn from those pictures how to think critically about technology. This is from an old client of ours. Without knowing anything about this client, what can I tell about their value proposition to technology and my liability? First of all, it's mounted to a nicely painted piece of backer board. So they cared enough to paint the piece of backer board. That's important to know. It's mounted well. The wires are well managed. These are positive things. They were willing to invest in this job, even though it's not rack mounted, they were willing to invest in it being done somewhat properly. But wait a minute, they're storing chemicals in WD-40 right under it, so they clearly don't appreciate environmental conditions and access control. Those are not important to them. I can't come into them very heated about a not locked server door type of an argument because they don't give a shit. You can already see that there. How many routing devices are in that picture? It's all 3. What do they do? Where do they go? I don't know. I can't manage that cable modem, and I can't manage that ARIS modem either remotely. Maybe I can get access to what's probably a VoIP bridge there. I don't know. All 3 of those boxes are the unfucking for me, because if something happens with them, I can't do anything about it from my office. That's what you're looking for. There's no power protection. So you learn a whole lot just from this picture about this client's value proposition, how they've purchased previously, how they treat technology, what they felt was valuable for their last provider to do, and what they felt wasn't valuable. Because that last MSP isn't incompetent. They didn't not suggest power protection. Of course they did. Remember, most of the MSPs in your market are doing an acceptable job. That's not an excuse. Oh, the last MSP's dumb. They didn't set it up right. Of course they wanted to set it up right. The client didn't want them to, or they didn't overcome challenges. I go into your environments and find something and be like, your MSP's stupid. You didn't do this here. And then you would be like, well, we brought that up. Here's evidence of the discussion we had, and the client declined it. Right? Don't assume malice. You know? Missed one. Sorry. So, picture of every room humans use where appropriate. We don't have a picture of the bathroom, but you want everywhere humans, and because you're supporting people, and you need to understand where those people go in the business and what they do. I'm out of time, I'll wrap this up. A video of how to get from the parking lot to the infrastructure room, because you are going to send team members there later, and they need to know how to get there without being like, hi, I'm here from the MSP. How do I get to the server closet? Which is a terrible first impression. Don't over tech. Like we already talked about, how clean or shabby is the tech? How often are they spending on things? How much do they value something being clean? And then how clean or shabby is their non-tech stuff? Like if they have desks, if they have like what their line of business is it old and terrible? Dental, right? Dental office, like how many times you go in a dental office and all their like IDEX and like, you know, their Dexis machines are faded, old, dusty, and shitty. And you're like, yeah, like, this is going to be somebody that's never going to pay me the appropriate amount for anything, but it's going to expect me to find a way to onboard their $200,000 while you wait, you know, crown machine on a mesh network series of WAPs their nephew bought from Best Buy. Well, you just figured that out by looking at the fact that they treat their current equipment like crap. I have like 5 more minutes to hear?
3 more.
3, okay. So, once you've done all this and you've created a standards report that's sort of your minimum standards, what just has to be fixed, don't just hand that to your sales team. Be the pre-VCIO. You're going to be one once they're your client. So think about revenue in their business. Think about what their goals and objectives are in their business. And you come to them, and while it's a beautiful trash fire, you're going to own that trash fire. And you're going to basically go in and let them know a list of everything that needs to be improved. And anything on that list that only you care about, you cross it off the list. And anything on that list the client is never going to care about, even if it's incredibly important, like a security control or firewall firmware or subscription, you cross it off that list. Everything that's left is your minimum pre-onboarding standard. And the reason why all this is important is you put that together, it displays immediate value. I bet you're all comfortable, skipping a few slides here, but I bet you are all comfortable with selling a project where you actually do something, right? Like the onboarding, you're a little uncomfortable with because it's kind of for you, but labeling their wire, maybe changing out a few pieces of gear early on, like that's real work. That's something that is worth charging for. That's something that you feel is acceptable to charge for. Something the client can see. Something the client can see right away. Something that the client knows they won with right away when they get some new wiring, some new labels, the switches are a little more organized. The whole environment is just a little bit better. Even though we all know you've just hit the tip of the iceberg of the work that needs to be done. Bet you charge for that project, right? And so that, keep this really quick because we're going to talk about profitability, and that's something we're all uncomfortable with because if you were all super profitable, you wouldn't be here. That remediation plan enables you to bring things like cost to the table. It allows you so many opportunities to solve a little bit of pain up front that'll make your lives easier and allow you to give the client an amazing experience that they feel rewarded for instantly. Instantly, they feel rewarded for having signed with your MSP. Remember, your onboarding is going to be shitty. They're not going to feel rewarded for that. That support's going to be terrible. They're going to feel great. You fixed a bunch of stuff at the beginning, though, stuff they can see, stuff that aligned with their values, stuff that aligned with their business. Wow, you guys are great. I'm so glad I hired you. I'm so glad I didn't go with that competitor who didn't have that process. And here's the thing. If the client chooses not to do this plan, support's going to cost more. It's going to cost you more to support the client. So suddenly, right away, you have this tool in the hopefully pre-sales process where there's no support fee. But if these minimum things don't get fixed, here's your new support fee. Because remember, I want a profitable agreement. Ultimately, I don't really care if the salesperson does or doesn't sell this. I just want to make sure my service team has the right margins in place to render a profitable agreement. I won't read this to you. It's just a way to frame that language to the client. And then finally, if a client has this objection that you're telling me I need to do things to be eligible for support, right? That's kind of off-putting a little bit. You want it to be off-putting. You don't actually have to charge anybody for any project, ever. You don't have to invoice for anything you do. But if you charge for it, you assign that value, you set the client up to understand there is a roadblock. You need to be this tall to ride Dean at his MSP. Maybe don't say that. You've set from the beginning that you have standards, you have a plan, and the client is opting out of it. And they're opting out of it for low-level things, for basic things they do understand, not high-level concepts like being compliant or cybersecurity or anything like that. Like basic stuff like, client, I really want wires to be labeled. Nah, dog, I don't want to pay you for that. Okay, I mean, we'll still take you on, but that's going to cost us more. Like right away, you also have a red flag in that situation. If you want the rest of the deck, come find me later. Come talk to me at the help booth if you want to. A lot of this content's on Empath, if any of you are Empath people, whatever. Sorry I went long.